All right. Hello, all the humans. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix Sunday speaker event. Remember, if you like our content, please hit the subscribe button and get more of our awesome content. You can also join our Patreon, or better yet, become a member of the HSGP community. So today's presentation aligns with our values of humanism by critical thinking, which is thinking critically allows us to make more sense of information and reason our way to good judgments and effective solutions to the problems we face, while rigorously avoiding pitfalls like rationalization, conformity, and stereotyping. Ethical development is a never-ending process that requires constant reflection and evaluation of our personal choices and the consequences they have on others. And responsibility. Each day, each of us make choices. These choices, large and small, all have consequences for ourselves and the world around us. Today, we have Tania Gerard with Marriage. Is it possible to update this oppressive structure? Tania Gerard is a congruencer, crafter of questions, bridge builder, and passionate feminist. She has been a part of social and reproductive justice projects in Mexico, Spain, and the United States, and has been a member of HSGP since 2020 and hosts the monthly Intersectional Book Studies group. Please give a big HSGP welcome for Tania Gerard.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Ron, for being open to this crazy idea when we discussed it. And as you know, as the best stories ever, these started with a coffee. So thank you so much for being here. I prepared a slide presentation to guide, visually through the conversation. The first part are ideas that I want to present to you. The second part is about reflections or reflective questions that you could use to apply the ideas that I'm presenting you. And the third part, hopefully, is question and answer, or even better, a dialogue and a conversation. So is it okay if I just start? Run? Yes? Okay. I will start by sharing my screen. And it worked during the rehearsal. So let's hope that it works now too.
All good, working.
Okay. Yes, everything. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the question that opens this conversation is it possible to update the oppressive structure of marriage? And I will dive into the question beforehand. So first of all, the purpose of this conversation is to reflect on the alignment between the traditional assumptions of marriage and our humanist values. We could reflect on, all humanist values, but we will focus on a few that are truly relevant, in my opinion, to the conversation about marriage. Now, what this conversation is not, first of all, it is not a debate about the oppressive nature of marriage as an institution. We can have that debate. I am very glad to open about it. But for this conversation, this is our starting point. Marriage as an institution, as a social, legal, religious institution, is oppressive to many people for different reasons. And it is an institution that I feel we have outgrown as a society, as a community, especially from the humanist thinking. So now this is not a conversation about romantic love. Marriage and romantic love in this conversation are not the same thing, right? So we're not talking about how much you love or how much people love their partner. This is not about that. And this is not a critique of your long marriage behaviors, or of your long marriage or your behaviors, right? This is not personal. And I have developed the habit to clear this out, because as a feminist who has been, sharing ideas for the last 20 years, I have observed that people tend to feel these conversations to receive them as a personal critique. And I think that will be an obstacle for the critical thinking that we want to achieve today. So we are talking about society values, about society assumptions. And yes, we will land them to your personal life, but from a constructive perspective. So this is what this exploration is not. But let's start with what it is, right? So first, the definition that we are using for marriage today is the legal, religious, and social acknowledgement of the relationship between two individuals as a social unit that may or may not include shared property, shared resources, and children. Now, in the United States, which is another part that is important to consider, I will focus the conversation on marriage in the United States. I will not address race issues on marriage, only interracial marriage. But I want everybody to be aware that the history of marriage between Black people is different and has different considerations. The history of marriage between Native people, Native American people, or Latino people have different considerations. So I have generalized just because we had an hour, right? Not a week. So it is important to understand, and this is kind of reinforce the idea that marriage, this legal, social, and religious acknowledgement of a relationship between two people has left out a number of people in its history. And very recently, marriage, intersex marriage, that means marriage between people from different races, was illegal until 1967 in this country. I don't know you know that, but it's always very helpful to remember because, marrying a person from a different race has not been legal in this country for, we don't even have 100 years that it has been legal, right? It's very recent. And the marriage between two people of the same sex was non-existent, not illegal, but non-existent until 2015. That is 5 years for 5 years ago, right? So this is always a reminder that when we talk about oppressive institutions, marriage has been one that leaves people behind. It has been used in many ways to discriminate people from accessing certain privileges. Okay, so humanist values. The humanist values that I am going to focus, because maybe they're my favorite, my personal favorites, but they have to do with greater good in general. So we have the greater good. What I do impacts on the well-being of my fellow humans, right? We have compassion, and compassion, I understand it from a trauma-informed perspective. That is, I don't need to understand to love. I don't need to forget to forgive. I can still be very aware of my own wounds and aware of my own boundaries while I acknowledge your wounds and your boundaries, right? So that's compassion as I understand it. That's a humanist value. Knowledge. And knowledge, as an intersectional feminist, an intersectional humanist, if you may, knowledge is tricky for me because humanist values, humanist ideas, humanism was born, I always imagined, a male person sitting on a desk, writing these super deep reflections about human nature while somebody brought a cup of tea for him and he would drink it. And then he would need to go and make contact with nature. So he would go out and take a walk and think these amazing and big thoughts, and then come back and sit on the table to eat the dinner that someone had prepared for him. And then he would go to a clean bed and sleep there, a restful sleep, to be more creative and to imagine all these alternatives, while other people took care of that to be possible for him. So I believe there is a lot to reflect on the whole idea of knowledge. But for the purpose of this conversation, I want to include the acknowledgement of people lived experiences in part of this knowledge. I don't need to have hard numbers to acknowledge someone's truth regarding their lived experience. The other humanist value I want to focus on is science, and science in its simplest expression, the scientific method. So science is about questioning, right? Science is about not assuming. It is about asking a question, finding an answer, and then knowing if it can be generalized or not. I think that's an essential element to update our ideas of marriage and, in general, human relationships. The humanist values of human rights and personal liberties are also relevant to this conversation about marriage, because it feels sometimes like they're still linked, either evidently or not. And we will discuss that in a second. Okay, so I'll take a sip of water and we will start with this conversation with going through each humanist value and their questions regarding marriage. Okay. So the first question, when we think about marriage as a legal unit, let's forget about the religious unit right now. Let's talk about the legal unity. Two people who sign an agreement have the possibility to share resources, have the possibility, and with possibility, I mean responsibility and rights, like together. They share custody of children, or at least in theory, they would both be acknowledged as parents or guardians of these children. And they enjoy a number of privileges towards the other person. And with these privileges, I am referring specifically to legal privileges. So when the spouse is considered next of kin. So if someone is in a hospital unable to make a decision, next of kin is the spouse. If someone gets in an accident, next of kin is the spouse. So when you think about it, spouses become the person who will make every decision upon somebody's individual life in case they're incapacitated to do that. And there are legal resources to change that, but we're talking about the defaults, right? We just assume that will happen. So when marriage is not recognized, is leaving people out from these privileges. What happens if I have spent my life with somebody, but we're not married, legally married? Does it work the same? Do they have the same rights, the same privileges? Do we have the same responsibility? What happens? And when you think of people who, for any reason, cannot access marriage, then they're being left behind, right? Now, I know that so far we have focused on achieving marriage, interracial marriage, gay marriage, or marriage between people of the same sex. Yes, that's a good short-term goal. I offer the question, is this really the path on a long-term goal? How can we reimagine social units in a way that does not carry this history of oppression and limits? Now, the second humanist value, compassion, is this a choice? So in feminism, we talk a lot about choice, and choice regarding body autonomy, choice regarding life paths. And there is a conversation going on to define what is a real choice, right? Because people can only make a choice when they have options, right? And there are some, very common questions about, do women in poor conditions really have a choice to choose sex work or not? Do women who do not, and this is the extreme example of other countries where women are not considered citizens unless they're represented by a man, so marriage, is that really a choice? Or women earn less money than men, that's a fact. Again, not a debate. So women earn less money than men. Is it really a choice to marry a man who has access to more resources? We could go, I don't know, we could go on that a long time, because choices are always contextual. And choices are always, again, exposure. That's another form of choice. If we have rural communities and even urban communities, but let's use this vignette, right? So we have rural communities where everybody that can finishes high school and then get married at 19, and that is just what happens. Is that really a choice? Right? Okay, so marriage as a choice, yes, if you have enough privilege, if your intersections allow you to actually have options, it is a choice. I am not sure it's the case for everybody. And even the relationships, or for people who are married, was this marriage a choice, right? That's a big question, and it can be great. It can be amazing after 50 years, but it's okay, and I think necessary even, to understand the origin of it. Okay, so the humanist value of knowledge. What do we know now, right? When marriage was, so researchers trace the history of marriage to agriculture. Before that, the hunter and gatherer communities did have different responsibilities between men and women, but those differences did not have a hierarchy, right? Hunting was not more important than gathering, or having children was not more important than preparing food, right? And there's a book called Mothers and Others from the evolutionary psychologist Hardy, where she explores this in a very interesting way. Like, yes, there has been labor division. It's possible to say that it has been labor division throughout the history of humanity. However, labor hierarchy There's no way to prove it, right? But there came agriculture. And agriculture meant that there was land that would produce resources. It was property. And that property, we couldn't carry it around, right? So researchers trace the beginnings of marriage as an institution to agriculture, where people with a uterus were expected to provide children that would both provide labor to cultivate that land and would inherit that property, creating intergenerational wealth. Now, marriage was important because there was a need to ensure the property of that uterus, right? I don't want any other man's children to inherit my property. Therefore, this woman needs to be protected of ownership from anybody else. And when we think about this part of the history of marriage, we need to acknowledge that marriage starts as a property relationship, right? And we still have symbolic parts of that property. When we expect women to change their last name to their husbands, we are reinforcing the idea of property. In ancient Rome, women did not have names. Women used the name of the patriarch. So if Claudius had a daughter, she would be Claudia. And then if there were 3 different Claudias, because there were the 3 different daughters, they would have nicknames. Claudia the beautiful, Claudia the good cook, and Claudia the one with the beautiful eyes. Women were not granted an individual identity. And we have been carrying that practice by expecting married women to take their husband's name. So that's one example, right? So if my humanist value is knowledge, I can ask, what do I know now about the institution of marriage that I have the capacity to change or improve or open to a better humanist practice, even if it's only in my personal marriage? Okay, science, and this probably is my favorite. So queer culture, with queer, I mean any relationship, any romantic social relationship that is not heterosexual or among cis people, right? So queer culture has offered many, many, many helpful questions about relationships. And both feminism and queer theory talk about consent. So in the scientific method, right? I have a hypothesis, I ask a question, I experiment, and then I prove or disprove the hypothesis, and then I analyze the possibility to replicate it. That's scientific method in a nutshell. Well, consent is all about this, right? Consent is about how much agency I have upon pushing somebody else's boundaries. So the immediate answer to that is none. None of us has any agency or right or permission to go over anybody else's boundaries. especially if we consider ourselves humanists and we believe in personal liberties, bodily autonomy, agency, etc. So what do? I have a hypothesis. Hey, I have the hypothesis that you feel attracted to me and I feel attracted to you, and we might enjoy a kiss. May I kiss you? Right? I'm not assuming anything. I am asking directly, asking for permission, and then I don't have a like, whoa, but I am really requesting an enthusiastic permission. I need more than a well, right? Or I need more than a maybe. I need a real yes. And then we can ask, hey, can we agree that I can kiss you whenever I feel like it? Or maybe not. Maybe the agreement is no, we cannot, but you can ask me whenever you feel to. Okay, so this is a very simple example of consent. How is it relevant to marriage? The first element that comes to mind is we have been assuming that monogamy is part of marriage, especially here in the United States. I believe that part of this scientific method approach and part of these human rights and personal liberties and even acknowledging the evolution and growth of people is to stop assuming monogamy and agree on it if necessary. So how many marriages that could potentially be good relationships have ended because there was not a conversation about whether or not monogamy was relevant to that relationship, right? If we want to escape the oppressive nature of the possession of the uterus, we need to stop assuming monogamy as part of a marriage. We need to remember that marriage is about shared properties, not ourselves as the other person's property. Emotionally, physically, sexually, manual labor, etc. The other two humanist values that have a direct impact on our ideas of marriage are human rights and personal liberties. So to be a citizen means to have access to resources and to be able to make decisions about those resources, right? So if, and this is a clear example, during December, all the jobs that were lost, all the people who lost their employment were women. Mostly because women are taking over disproportionately over, online school or just childcare, as the pandemic has changed the availability of childcare as an outsourced resource. So women who are just assumed to care for children for longer and either decide to leave their jobs because, we're human and they're 24 hours a day and we're exhausted, or they have been let go of their jobs because, you're a woman, there's so many interruptions in your work, or you're not keeping it together, whatever reason. Is this woman really having access to the resources that she needs to be a citizen? Is she having access to economic resources, to time resources? Or is she being cornered into staying in a marriage or even getting married to have access, like secondary access to these resources? Or when we link retirement plans to individual work, that's the other side of the coin, right? You save the money that you earn during your work life. What if work has never, like paid work has never been available to you because you're a housewife. Who is in charge of that, of providing that retirement money? Right? So conversations about universal income, conversations about acknowledging the citizenship of an individual regardless of their marital status are relevant to human rights. And agency, again, an agency in the form of labor, right? Women, and I'm sorry, I need a moment here to be, okay. So agency upon my work. If the gender mandate is that women take care of men's emotions and social life, then women are not having agency upon their time and emotional energy to take care of themselves. If women are expected to take care of the household work, maybe not directly, and this is the trap of and I know, I am sure all of you have ever had this conversation or saw these memes. Like, if I need to think of what I need to do, then I'm managing, right? I'm doing the labor, even if I'm not, passing the vacuum. But that management of the labor inside of the household, if I have to devote all my energy to it, then what energy do I have to take care of myself, right? And in this case, we can also talk about the traditional gender mandates for men, for straight men, which is, if the gender mandate is for you to be a provider, what happens when you're not providing for whatever reason? Or do you really have an option to not be a provider without that being a problem? Right? And we have anecdotes about marriage problems because suddenly her is making more money than him. And the experience of that situation becomes an experience of less personal worth among the relationship. So we end up in a world where women who cannot cook and men who cannot get a good salary are not fully enjoying their citizenship, right? And that's only talking about heterosexual people or people who would be willing to have a marriage with a person of the opposite sex. So these are some of the questions that I went through, and I know it's a lot of information for just a little time, but this is the kind of thinking that I believe is necessary if we want to align our values as humanists with the society that we live within. So again, the question is it possible to update the oppressive structure of marriage, right? This part was the case. Is it possible? And I'm going to quote one of my favorite Spanish sociologists, Lucas Platero, who says, possession is a very perverse way to think of another person. So how much of this possessive thinking are we bringing to our personal relationships, to our closest, most cherished personal relationships? Marriage has always been about survival. And when we lose sight of that, we risk being oppressive and being cruel. Okay, so very coming from those values that we discussed, these are ideas that I am proposing to specifically work on these three elements of consent, agency, and love. So to assume is to forgo science, right? So if we believe in science, if we believe in the scientific method, if we believe in the value of questioning assumptions, it is important to bring consent, agreements, and an update of our identity to our marriage as an institution. That means whether we are talking about our personal marriage, or we are talking about marriage, or we're just, considering marriage as a social unit, we need to bring up the elements of consent. Do you consent to take care of these things? I will not assume any gender mandate. I will not assume that your behavior will satisfy my needs. I will ask. I will ask for permission. I will ask for labor. I will ask for resources. I will ask for agreements. Agreements are contracts, right? I like to use the word agreement because agreement feels less permanent than a contract. I believe that agreements need to be updated. And in a world where people slowly but steadily are finding the space, we are all creating and finding the space to be who we are, there needs to be a constant updating of who we are within a marriage. And that way, our marriage becomes a relationship between individuals and not a relationship between gender mandates or gender stereotypes. So this is definitely the way to, these are ideas on how to approach consent within the analysis of marriage. Agency. Citizenship is about having access to resources and make decisions about them. So within marriage, are we both exercising our citizenship? Are we both aware of the emotional, manual, and reproductive labor that we bring to our unit? Are we willing to find ways to collaborate? And collaborate maybe is not about doing the same thing together. Maybe it's about taking part of a whole goal that we share. And agency about identity, property of the uterus, sexuality, monogamy, even what I want or not to bring to the relationship, especially in a straight relationship, right? Who am I beyond a woman or man? Creativity, what can we do different? So here I think there is an important question to ponder. What would it be to be married without shared property and or children? We all know about the empty nest syndrome, right? How a married couple goes through a significant conflict and reformulation of their roles once children are adults and leave the family house. What if there was not anything that we'd shared? What if it was only about waking up every day willing to spend the day with you as my partner in this society? How would that conversation go? Right? I feel that is definitely a question that we can ask. And again, while it is essential to have marriage available for everybody, because as for today, marriage still is a privilege. Married people enjoy more access to resources than people who are not married. And in countries like the United States, divorce is severely penalized financially, right? It's like it feels like they don't want us to get a divorce, right? Anybody who has gone through an experience like that, it's like, I wonder if we can do this differently and not lose all our savings in the process. So what if marriage wasn't a thing? While we work towards achieving equality to the privilege and access that marriage implies, what if we set a longer term goal where we find a different unit that acknowledges the collaboration between people to achieve safety as a social unit? Right? So that would be the creativity part. How can we do this differently? And I include a quote from Mario Benedetti, my favorite author, like from my life. And he has this poem that I loosely translated to: on the streets, elbow to elbow, we are many more than two. We need to understand that our social units, our marriages, our partnering, our pair bonds, as Ron called them, they are way more than just a relationship between two individuals. They represent the way that we understand society. And when our closest, most significant, literally our survival relationship is about possession, you know, we can only understand why our social conversation is about possession. So here are a few personal questions. If you have a notepad and you feel that one of these would be helpful, these are questions that I invite you to ask yourselves. And if you're in a marriage, I mean, if you're in a relationship, please do always. But if you're in a marriage and you're willing to take this conversation further with your spouse, here are some questions that can start that conversation between two individuals who fully access their citizenship and their personal agency. Am I being responsible for my emotions? Like, spoiler alert, if you're not, then you need to ask who and why. Do I feel safe? And this is a question that comes often in our intersectional book study. I am not referring to safety as in physical safety. I can feel perfectly safe physically and absolutely unsafe emotionally. When I am afraid to mention something to a person, I am not feeling safe. When I am choosing my battles because everything turns out, or there's some emotional dynamic that just makes it impossible to have a constructive conversation, that is not being safe. So this is a big question about marriage and meaningful relationships. Do I feel safe in this relationship? Does my spouse feel safe? What am I assuming that I could ask instead? And this is the yogurt experience, right? If you eat yogurt every morning, are you eating yogurt every morning because you like it? Because you're choosing? Because it's healthy? Have you asked yourself if you want to eat yogurt every morning, right? Well, that's a very simple and clear example of what assumption means in a relationship. I believe in the power of transformation, of asking someone, how would it be different? If it was perfect, how would you like it to be? Right? That's where creativity starts. Now, what agreements among your unit need to be updated or verbalized? There is something about verbalizing agreements. And I think that's when you start exploring consent as part of your personal relationships, that is part of the like the challenging part, right? When you say something, it feels very official. It feels very serious. It feels very transcendent. So I invite you to verbalize your agreements, because that is how serious they are. We cannot assume that we're counting on other person to do or do not do things that I just like telepathically assumed that they would do. And because I haven't seen anybody under probably 30 here right now, I hope more people, younger people do this. But you know what? We have the responsibility of question social units. And I invite you to communicate your values regarding social units, marriage, couples, families, to younger generations. When we ask, oh, are you changing your name when you get married? We are giving an option, right? How many young people do not know that it might not be necessary to do so? Or how it is to live your life with, having a different last name from your kids. Is that really terrible? Where does that conversation come from? But those children, those younger generations need to have these conversations. We need to have these conversations with them, and not just clap and send a lovely vase to the next wedding we're invited. Okay, so as a conclusion, before we go to questions, I see the chat going on. So if you only keep 3 things from today's conversation, we have come a long way as a society, and it's important to stop and acknowledge that, right? And it's also important to stop and acknowledge that we need to keep going. Marriage equality is the first goal, but I'm not sure it's the long-term goal. Let's question that. Let's get creative with what. The personal is political. And this is where all this conversation that I said is not personal is when it turns personal, right? What you do sitting down on your kitchen table is what really impacts the long-term society, the long-term goals of turning the society, of aligning our social values with our humanist values. So if you can do anything with your own relationship, then please do. We don't need to be out in the streets in this sense. We do need to be out in the streets, but for other things. For this is more the moment that you start having a meaningful conversation that honors yourself as an individual and honors your spouse as an individual. That is the moment you start dismantling an oppressive institution. And I will leave you with a quote from Andrea Gibson, wonderful poet. I don't have a single plan for my life more important than learning to love people well. Okay, so I will stop sharing and come back to Ron.
All righty then. Thank you very much. I've collected a whole bunch of questions. I want to leave people the opportunity to raise their hand. I love that. I've got a whole slide full of notes. All right. And with that, I'll go ahead and start at the beginning. Alex stated, Dan Savage describes humans as non-monogamous, but monogamish. He has a great talk about how not monogamy can be oppressive or harmful. My question to that is, how do you have a good marriage without monogamy? And how can we challenge the indoctrinated belief that a married person is another person's property? And to your question, if it was perfect, how would that be?
Okay, I am catching up here. I'm trying to catch up here. I saw a comment from JP. Hey, JP, thank you for being here. Okay, so the first part is the goal is to not let the gender expression of a person define if they hold power. So to that question, I would say the first idea is not to assume that another person's body is your property that you can access without permission. And I feel that having that awareness will open the next part of the conversation. Like, what would it be if you don't assume that we are, only sleeping with each other? What happens if we don't assume that you have access to my manual labor, like cooking dinner every night? What happens if we assume that I don't? What happens if I don't assume that you will give me the money that you earned through my, through your work, because I am providing you with nourishment and rest? Like, the moment you stop assuming, you can start imagining. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I believe it's important for every person. I believe that there are parts in a relationship, regardless of if people are married or not. There are times where being in a monogamous relationship is important. And there are times where people need to explore themselves in a different way. And that is essential to feminism, right? Sexuality is part of our identity. It's not the property of somebody else. So this would be like the short answer is I don't know. It depends on you. It depends on what you want, what you need, what you believe, and what you can co-create with your partner. I believe the first step is always stopping and just stop assuming and start asking.
Yep. I love that. Thank you. Roy, you are up next, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I wonder if Tania has ever been married or in a living with someone relationship, and what she expects from her partner, how this would work out. How much experience have you had living with someone as if you were married?
That I will answer that question because it is relevant to our conversation, although I feel it is very personal, and I don't think
marriage is very personal.
It is very personal. I will answer that. Yes, I have been married to men.
Oh, okay.
More than once. As you know, if you remember, for weddings and a funeral, I would say more than Lady D, less than Madonna. And yes, and all these experiences have been disastrous. I don't believe I have ever gotten married because I wanted to get married. I have gotten married because it was required of me because of the social circumstances. I know there are long-term marriages. I know that, and this is a correlationship between generations. Boomers have had longer marriages than Gen Xers, and Gen Xers have been married more times than millennials. This is something that is ongoing, and that is part of what we're assuming as well. What is marriage as an aspiration to fulfill as a person? Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Roy.
It does.
Well, I guess so.
Okay.
I was married for 54 years.
Yes.
I was very, very lucky, very fortunate.
Okay.
Yes.
Chet, you're still muted.
There. Okay, there we go. Well, I just want to say congratulations for your work. When I saw the title of this was going to be put the words marriage and oppression together, when I was a kid, probably 80% of American adults, only 20% lived alone. Right now, over 50% live alone. And I figure that in another 20 or 30 years, if things keep going like this, 80% of American adults are going to live alone. And we're doing all sorts of research. We got all sorts of laboratories trying to solve the problems of the world. But it seems like to me, the biggest problem that's staring us in the face is what we think of as a human family. I mean, it's certainly failed me and my ex-wives miserably. And I'm just thrilled to see someone focusing on what I think is a core problem for mankind. So that's really what I wanted to say. I could talk in hours about it, but no, I just really appreciate you being there.
Thank you, Chet. Thank you so, so much. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo that the thing that you said earlier, that to enable to have agency, you need to have the freedom and the privilege to be able to say no as well as yes, right? And that's a very important point, because that freedom and privilege is not always there, right? Brian, you're up.
Well, thank you, Tania. I totally appreciate your talk. I saw this talk as more of a great way of appreciating and understanding relationships, but I've always seen marriage as a different thing, as a way for two people, or or if you go polyamorous, in the polygamous sense, of that, then they have more people contributing to create intergenerational wealth. And so that's a different thing about a business merger. And that's a different thing than human relations, because now you're bringing business and society into your relationship. So that has brought, this perspective has brought a new understanding, a new layer to that for me, in how could, the multiple or people build those kinds of relationships and still be legal in a business sense. So, thanks.
Thank you, Brian. So with this that you're saying, and I caught a comment in the chat, like, how would this look like in society? I don't know. I don't have an answer. Like, my ideal social unit is a house that I share with people. Some of them are, probably one of them is my partner or not. All of them are my friends. And we usually, like, when I get together with my friends, with my close friends, we always say, like, we should just get a house and move in all together, right? And then it's like this roommates arrangement, but more as a permanent community unit. And it's just, and so my friends and I were women, right? And some of us have children. That's the other part. Like, do I really want my children to be exposed only to their dad and me? Fortunately, my kids are not. They are exposed to their dad and their friends and me and my friends and my people, right? But what kind of society we want to create, the society that we show as an option. So thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for offering this to me.
I think I've really formulated my question now. I think that was the precursor to that. So do do you feel that this is really an argument against our traditional marriage as a business as an intergenerational wealth producer, or do we need to completely change and go in some other way that's more collective?
That's a complex question. So I will come out
You
and
expect
acknowledge.
anything else from me?
Yes. I don't know if I could answer entirely right now. I would say my political position is way more of that democratic socialism as explained in Europe, right? I believe that there are certain duties of community safety that we should all be in charge of through our government. Like I believe that people should not be afraid of not having money to buy medicines if they're not married or if they don't have a job, right? So once that changes, the sky is the limit. Imagine a society where you don't need to marry someone to get access to their social care. To their health care. Imagine a society where there is a very firm agreement, like there's a guarantee that even if you spend your life taking care of children, you will have a retirement. Imagine a society where instead of 10 people cooking at the same time, we can get organized and each one of us cooks one day. So once we start exploring that, we can talk about the unity of marriage, the marriage as a unit. Maybe it's not necessary, because intergenerational wealth would be about people's wealth, not a specific family. And I know this is super idealistic. I'm aware of it. Okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I love this conversation. I'm so happy to have this. Go ahead, Brian.
If there's anything I can follow up with, yeah. So these are great arguments for, universal healthcare, UBI, all those things. And then a lot of the inequality issues would go away, and we wouldn't need to marry to have those, and we wouldn't have to stay in marriages because of those. It would be much more human. It'd be much more human-centered and allow us to have our relationships and our community bonds. But then, the whole thing is, it gets to that point where, like, polygamy is close to that, but it still has all those inequalities. So then it's not right either.
But polygamy is about owning more than one uterus.
Well, you also get that whole collective community. It's that house group that only one person cooks a day, or, there's all those other extra benefits, a division of labor that makes everybody's life easier.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it's just, I haven't lived in a polygamous community yet. So, and personally, I don't think I can handle like an emotional commitment with more than one person at the same time. But that's, this is me after reflecting about it. And if after reflecting about it, you say, like, you know what, my ideal way to live is in a legal marriage with one person with these settings, that's perfect. What my point is, let's not assume. Let's not just go and assume that that's how it is, right?
Let's verbalize that and have that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Henry, you are up, sir.
Okay. This is Mary who wishes to ask this question.
Well, I'm not asking a question. I'm just saying, since legally marriage is a contract,
Why not make it 5 years, a 5-year contract, and then renewable or not renewable as each person grows in a different way with different understandings?
I love that. Yes. I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
It is.
That's beautiful. I had the every day I wake up and I want to re-engage with that contract, right? Every day I make that decision to be in a relationship. And when that ceases to be productive for everybody, then that ceases to be productive for everybody. Yeah.
Well, if I could chime in on that too, because then you have to worry about children and family court, which is horrible.
Yeah, Mary, that's a very interesting question. The only complicated part is getting legally divorced is not the complicated part. Deciding who gets the stuff and the kids is the complicated part. So it it would not necessarily make it simpler unless you treat your property as separate throughout the marriage, and then it's sort of a less of an issue.
Yeah.
Historically, we need to remember that only wealthy people were able to get married. Right? Which is also another element to consider. And what Luke just said, like people who did not own property didn't get married. And marriage was sanctioned, like if we're talking about feudal society, marriage was sanctioned by the Lord. And, we all know about those horrible laws about the Lord being the owner of women's uteruses, not the spouses. So yes, marriage is necessarily linked to property. And that's why at the beginning, and I invite you to research because it's fascinating, the history of Black marriage in the United States is very interesting. Because what is oppressive in a perspective, from the perspective that we have approached, it's also rebellious and liberating from another perspective, right? Getting married as slaves meant different things.
Interesting. I had never thought of that before. Okay, Roy, you are up, sir. Are you muted? You are muted, Roy.
Here we go. I did something weird here.
You're good.
Oh, there's a thing. Oh, here it is. Okay.
We can hear you.
Thank you. My experience was entirely different, I guess, than a lot of people. When my wife and I decided to get married, we didn't really own anything. Well, I had a 49 Chevy, but that was it. I was in the Air Force, and she was going to school there in Spokane, Washington. So we just had a very sense of strong bonding and wanted to keep that. One thing I learned some time ago was that it's an old Oriental saying that is, we are all three people. There's the person your friends know, there's the person your family knows, and there's the person that only you know. And if a person rushes into marriage and the person you thought you were marrying isn't the one that really is, that causes a lot of trouble, and I think is one of the reasons there's a lot of divorces and family problems, this kind of thing. So it's not easy, but you do have to be careful. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of good conversations going on in the chat, and many of them aren't questions, so I'm not bringing them up. If someone would like to bring one of them up, they are more than welcome to. I see them as more observations.
Yeah. Well, we knew each other for 3 months before we got married, and so we lucked out.
Yeah, I got married my first time after knowing them for 3 months also.
Uh-huh.
And I am on my second divorce now. So yes.
Oh dear. Well, that's too bad.
Yeah,
But I think it just proves the point.
yeah.
Well, if there is any other question, I'm
Well,
happy
I will make a comment. And I really like you see, the issue is what is a viable social unit? I think that's, first of all, the most important thing that the family is supposed to do is take care of the young. I mean, that's at least all the other social primates take care of their young. And so if we go and look at what a family is with them, it's just a bunch of individuals who need each other to survive. Not one of them could survive alone. But unfortunately, humans don't need each other to survive anymore because we've got property and money. So, if there was no property and money, I believe that tomorrow we would start bonding in social groups because that's the only way a human can survive. And those social groups would be families. And I guarantee you, those families wouldn't have to have the institution of education to take care of their children, to babysit their children, if you know what I mean. In other words, during this COVID, it's become very apparent that whatever we think of as a family is not able to take care of our young. And that's got to be the most essential thing that any social species does to survive. They have some kind of a family that takes care of their young. And I really appreciated what you said. If your girlfriends and your kids got to live in a village, which you would create with your girlfriends, and you said that you're not ready to commit to a bunch of people. And of course, no one's ready to commit to anything, but we're sure willing to love each other because we need each other. But love is not commitment. Love is an arrangement. I mean, commitment is an arrangement. Love is an expression of the human spirit. And we're living by arrangements instead of expressions of our souls. So when you said that marriage is repressive, boy, it was repressive for me and my dear wives, because both they and I had to pretend we're something we're not, just to stay under the same roof together. And there's nothing more repressive to any creature than have to pretend you're something you're not in order to maintain your living arrangements. Well, I'm sorry, I sort of spilled out there, but you can see why I'm really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Chet. And Alex, you're next. And then Roy, we're going to go ahead and close it out. We will hang out after if you'd like to ask after we stop the recording.
Okay, I did have a question.
So yeah, hang on. Alex, you're first.
So just real briefly, when I hear words like social unit, I'm considering what social means. I wonder where unit would come in with that, because we being social and social species, a unit is not necessarily two people or one person. It's the broader community at large. And but while I do appreciate the idea of love being a part of marriage, I do kind of question the idea that marriage is all about raising children. If that were the case, then that continues the ban on same-sex marriages or gender diverse marriages. And it also prohibits things like marriages after childbirth is even possible. So I do kind of question the idea that marriage is only about raising children. To me, marriage is kind of being updated, getting closer to what Tania was talking about. And I do appreciate the ideas, and something I'm certainly going to be thinking about a lot more. But we've already kind of updated marriage based on the legal definitions of it here in the US. So we're making progress. She's absolutely correct in pointing that out. And she rightly points out we have a long way to go. So I don't know. I guess my question is, do we, in fact, if we do have a long way to go, what does that begin to look like as we continue the progress that we're making now? I mean, how can we make those incremental steps right now?
Thank you, Alex. That is a very good question, very tactical oriented. I believe that this conversation 2 years ago would have gone completely different from now. Because 2020 has changed a lot of our reality, right? So my first idea on moving forward. Well, moving forward, one is an invitation to talk about your relationships with your partner or partners, right? To bring this reflection to the personal, because as an intersectional feminist, and what I'm noticing is that we all speak from our experience, right? When you ask someone else about their experience, you enrich your own view of it. So even as using one of your examples, like we have made marriage not about children, I would ask other people here if they have been questioned when they have decided not to have children while in a marriage, right? And cultural oppression, like culture does not happen in the Constitution. Culture happens as your Aunt Rose asks you a question in Thanksgiving, during the Thanksgiving dinner. That's culture, right? What your neighbor, your aunt, your mom, your dad, your niece, I don't know, the clerk in the supermarket is asking you. So that's one. A personal, individual conversation, I think it's very important. Second, I believe that we need to make sure everybody has access to healthcare and everybody has access to a safety network. I know many people, and this is, I know, anecdotic, but I know many people my age that were in the middle of a divorce or just about to start a divorce, and they have been staying at home with their soon-to-be ex-partner because it's just not sustainable to become two family units, two economical units right now. And, that is just as oppressive as not being able to become one unit. We are not being able to exercise agency. So I would focus there, and then let's move on. After we all have healthcare, after we can all be sure that we are not in the possibility of ending up in the streets, whatever that means, then we'll talk about all this.
Awesome. Thank you, Tania. Thank you for bringing this to our community. It's a great conversation. It sparked a lot of interest, and I'm really thankful for your time. With that, any final statements you'd like to wrap up, or any way that people can get in contact with you to follow up?
Yes, thank you. Well, here's my email. You can send me an email there. Tania Gerard az@gmail.com. I'm happy to facilitate conversations about intersectional feminism and equity, which are my priorities. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being open to these questions and this reflection. And please remember that this is how we change the world, right? Personal reflection and how we start changing our relationships with the people closest to ourselves. That is how we start changing the world. So thank you so much. And thank you, Ron, for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. As always, if you enjoyed our content, then please hit the subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon page, or become a member of HSGP, or volunteer to make the magic happen. With that, be well, stay safe, and goodbye, HSGP.
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.